All right. Well, hello. I am Mike Day, dealer service representative here at AGWS. Welcome to our March AGWSU F&I Insights webinar. Today we have Bob Harkins, our Vice President of Training, joined by Dave Robertson, President of AFIP, and Randy Hendrick, Principal at Randy Hendrick and Associates LLC. And they'll be covering the 2021 first quarter and beyond. Got a couple topics for you. If you have any questions or comments, please type them in the panel on the right. We'll try to address them as they come. For follow-up questions, you can email bharkins@agws.com. So with that, Bob, Dave, and Randy.
Very good. Let's go to the next slide, Mike, if we could. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to F&I Insights. What a joy it is for all of you to be joining us for this month's expanded edition of F&I Insights, where our goal, as always, is to help our agent partners and dealer clients to maximize deal profit, meaning both front-end gross and finance and insurance income, but as always, to do it the right way, and that is in a manner that's consistent with good customer relations and sound business practices. What's really unique about this month's workshop is we're going to get into 11 issues, 11 topics, and quite frankly, 7 of these 11 came as a request from the people that should be and hopefully are on our webinar. But even if they're not, they can pick it up because all of our webinars are recorded. And if you go to agwsu.com/webinars, you pick up, now it will be all 19 of the webinars that we've done. You can play them. You can contact me for the slides, and we can do training independently or together with whatever you might want to do. Now that we have 3 of us for today's webinar, Randy Hendrick, myself, and Dave Robertson, to give some order to the webinar so that just won't be a free-for-all, as we get into these 11 topics, what I will do is step number 1, I'll introduce the topic and the issue. Do some scribble on the board that Dave always chides me about as far as my penmanship or lack thereof. So I'll make some comments with respect to that. Then I'm going to turn to our attorney, Randy Hendrick. Randy will explain and address these topics in due course. And finally, for each one, Dave will provide the guidance on the action a dealer can take to not get caught short with respect to any one of these things. So again, 7 of the 11 really come from the people that are joining us today. So let's begin with the 2021 first quarter and beyond, a look ahead to the politics. And Randy and Dave, topics 1 and 2 really kind of go together. Topic 1 is going to be the answer to the question, what does a Biden Harris administration, admin for short, what does the Biden-Harris administration mean for auto sales and F&I? So topic number 1 is going to be, what does the Biden-Harris administration mean to auto sales and F&I? And topic number 2, to go with that, is something that Dave and I have talked about before. We have a lot of questions on. That is from a dealer perspective, from a CNE's perspective, compliance and ethics. Who should we fear / respect the most?
Well, I can talk a little bit about
and Randy will address that in just a minute. So
okay.
The ones that we want to talk about for sure, and then maybe Randy can kind of group these for us. A would be obviously the finance source or sources that buy our paper. B, let's say, would be the attorney general of my respective state. C, let's say, is the Federal Trade Commission and things that are happening with them. D, Randy will talk about the CFPB. And E, the ever popular Department of Justice, DOJ, and F, let's just call them the predatory litigators. Great term. Attorneys in your market area that know very well what's going on in the store in the area. So topics 1 and 2, what the Biden-Harris administration means for auto sales and F&I, and then Randy tie into that compliance and ethics. Who should dealers fear or respect the most? And maybe talk about that in terms of finance sources, Attorney General, the Federal Trade Commission, the CFPB, the Department of Justice, and last but not least, certainly predatory litigators. So with that, I'm going to turn to Randy for his comments and address. Then after that, be right to Dave to talk about the guidance or action a dealer can take to protect themselves. Randy Hendrick. Randy.
Thank you, Bob. The Biden administration is looking already and will continue to look very different than what the Trump administration looked like. And you don't have to look any further than to the people that President Biden has nominated to head the CFPB and the Federal Trade Commission. They're both FTC commissioners at the present time, and neither one of them is a fan of auto dealers. Rohit Chopra, who is a senior FTC commissioner and has now been nominated to head the CFPB, is not a fan of dealers. He speaks about dealer markup as an undisclosed kickback that dealers earn for convincing prospective car buyers to agree to a higher interest rate than they actually qualify for. These arrangements are kept secret from buyers who end up paying more for financing. And he's a strong proponent of something that we saw in the Obama administration with Richard Cordray, which is disparate impact analysis. Disparate impact is a type of credit discrimination where you don't have any intent to discriminate. You don't have any knowledge you're discriminating. You adopt facially neutral practices, but from somebody's statistical analysis done after the fact, it's determined that your practices have a negative effect on protected classes of people: race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status. And that's a violation of either the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, or in Mr. Chopra's view, it's an unfair trade practice, which we'll talk about later. The new FTC commissioner, who I imagine is going to be the federal regulator for most of the people on the call today, also commented on this case last year in New York, in which she said the automobile financing market in the United States is profoundly broken. The tricks and traps that the New York dealer used against consumers are all too prevalent at auto dealerships around the country. There are a cornucopia of consumer abuses, from bait and switch advertising to rip-off fees for certified vehicles, and from illegally exorbitant fees for vehicle registration to padding final sales contracts with air money consumers would not detect. And she also talks about the buy rate. One of the issues that they've both also talked about are aftermarket products, and the fact that dealers mark them up, they say, more to protected classes of people, people of color, women, and other unsophisticated consumers than they do for white males. We'll talk a little bit later about the two NATA programs that are designed to address the disparate impact risk. What you should know about both of these people, and they're going to be the heads of the auto finance initiatives by the government, that they don't like auto dealers. They believe what consumer advocates believe about dealer participation, aftermarket product sales. And these two people are very much advocates of bringing lawsuits, enforcement actions against auto dealers. In the Trump administration, most of the initiatives involving auto dealers were handled in behind the scenes supervisory exams that were not made public. And the emphasis there was on conduct change, not on collecting large dollar penalties. That's going to change. The bringing of enforcement actions, lawsuits, and getting high dollar penalties is going to be a priority for the new Biden administration leaders in auto finance. And this is something that we're going to talk a little bit more about later, but it's going to require you to revisit your compliance practices and programs and make sure you do training, make sure that you adopt, we'll talk about the native programs, but you're going to need to adopt programs in place to show that you're above board, that you're transparent, and that none of what you do has a disparate impact on minorities and other protected classes of people. It's going to be a different world. Now, I'll also address topic 2. I think the auto finance source is always the first person you should be concerned about, because they're the ones buying the paper. They're the ones who can charge back the paper. In that regard, recently, there have been Attorney General actions against auto lenders for gap refunds. And in fact, the Attorney General of Colorado settled a lawsuit recently with Wells Fargo that would require Wells Fargo to pay $9.5 million in gap refunds when a customer pays off early or the car is repoed, pay the refund to consumers. They also agreed to pay $37 million in unearned gap charge refunds to customers in other states. What I am hearing from lawyers in the auto dealer community is that a number of lenders are asking auto dealers to sign agreements that say that the auto dealer will defend and indemnify the lender if there is a gap refund claim brought against the lender. Now, this is just nuts, because a dealer doesn't know when a customer pays off early or has their vehicle repoed unless the lender tells them. If the lender tells the dealer can call the administrator and put a gap unearned premium refund into the works. But that's not part of what a number of lenders are trying to do. And dealers need to push back on that. They need to say, look, if you'll tell us when a customer pays off early or has their vehicle repossessed, then we'll get with the administrator and put the refund in place. But you can't expect us to know that, because once the contract is purchased, we don't have any dealings with the customer, except the occasional customer who may come in and trade in a vehicle. But that's a small minority. So that's an issue that we're seeing, and we'll have to see where that goes. I think the Attorney General is the second priority source, because if a dealer is going to see a regulator, chances are it's going to be their state Attorney General. There's a much more limited universe of dealers that the Attorney General covers versus the FTC or the CFPB. In connection with all regulators, a critical issue for dealers is going to be how you manage customer complaints, because already the interim CFPB director has said consumer complaints to the CFPB hotline is how the agency is going to take its orders for what to inspect, what to look at, and who to go after. So if you could resolve a customer dispute, even if it means giving the customer a windfall up front and not have it get to an Attorney General, not have it get to the FTC or the CFPB, you're going to be much better off. Because if they start getting complaints in, that's when they send in the auditors, and that's when they begin to look for things. And let's face it, when they do an audit and look for things, they will find things. That's just the nature of the animal. Plaintiffs, the Department of Justice is another force that's now being headed by the Biden administration. So they're going to look more at auto dealers. What they've been doing the last couple of years is bringing actions against auto dealers for national bank fraud and interstate wire fraud for sending misrepresented credit application information to federally regulated banking institutions. So if your dealership would mark up a consumer's income or indicate they've been in a residence longer than they have, and that goes to a national bank that finances that customer, what the dealer has done is violated a federal law called national bank fraud. And it's making the bank take a risk that it would not otherwise take. and that's actionable under federal law. There have been multi-million-dollar penalties assessed for this. The Department of Justice can be expected under the Biden administration to be very active in this area again. And this is why information that's provided to financial institutions with credit has to always be accurate and complete. And there can't be any coaching of consumers to lie on credit applications, because those are the kind of cases that the Department of Justice looks at. And of course, the plaintiff's bar is always there. Whenever there's an action by a regulator, the plaintiff's lawyers are the next ones to the courthouse to file class actions, and arbitration clauses generally don't prevent a class action if the claim of the class action is for tortious conduct or non-contractual related conduct. So there are class actions pending against Wells Fargo over gap refunds. There are class actions against dealers that have otherwise been subject to enforcement actions by federal regulators and attorneys general. So they're out there, they're very expensive. They will come in and tear the dealership's records apart, and they will find stuff too. So I think your list there, Bob, is about accurate. And I think it's going to be a much more difficult time for dealers in the next 4 years than it has been in the last 4 years. Dave, do you want to talk about some other things dealers can do?
All right, thank you, Randy. Let's get into what can we do. I mean, he is dead on and has industry credentials to say that he's been deeply involved and his expertise drawn upon by NAD and at very high levels. Now, because I'm the guy that's going to give directions, I want to take a minute or two and tell you a little bit about why I think I know how to read the map. I've been active in the retail side of the automobile industry for 40 years. I was a founding member in 1989 of the Association of Financial Insurance Professionals. I own AFIP. I'm the one that writes the curriculum. So I've been doing AFIP, the certification of dealership personnel and people who support the personnel, Ford Motor Credit apps, or Ford Motor Credit dealer contact personnel as among them. I have represented the interest of the retail industry as a lobbyist before the Association of Attorneys General, of the Association of Insurance Commissioners, the IRS, never forget those people, represented the industry on ABC 2020. I've been quoted in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, a lot of other major newspapers. I've been 140 some articles published on regulatory compliance and practices. So let's talk about what we can do. The first thing we're swimming in is the sea of misunderstanding. Maybe at the consumer level, but certainly at the regulator level. Now, the justification for why they see it that way is simple. Nobody who buys a car is happy with it, gets everything done the way that it was supposed to be done, and their refunds and everything handled the way it's supposed to, calls up somebody at the CFPB or the FTC or the state attorney general. So their world is defined solely by what they see. And so one of the obligations we have, and that AFIP takes it under its wing and does, is we need to educate the people who make the rules as to how the industry really works. And I'll give you an example. Many years ago, when the service contract industry was in its more tumultuous times, the automotive news reporters were writing stories that were way off the mark. So I asked Automotive News for permission to go up and hold a class for the reporters. It was so successful, we did it every year for about 20 years. Now, if there's a train wreck at some point, you have to write about the train. But the more they learned about it and the more they understood, the better able they were to write a story that was more center point to what really occurred. I have been very aggressive, and I'm continuing to be aggressive now to educate Not necessarily Elizabeth Warren. I don't think I could change her mind, but the people that support the legislatures and regulators, and just tell them how the industry works. And we'll take away some of this all negative. I mean, if all I see is the bad, I assume it's all bad. If I tell them about how it's done right and make evidence that it's being done right, not that there's not transgressors, the first thing we can do then is educate the people that oversee our business. Because I can tell you now, they have a skewed view of what we do. The second, and probably equally important, is to educate the consumer. Now, with the internet, we're at a time in the automobile industry unprecedented. We have buyers, in many cases, maybe far too many, that are more knowledgeable than the sellers. But the more we can have of knowledge equal on both sides, the better off we are. Now, one of the things everybody wants to attack is that car purchases are a negotiated transaction. That's a bad word, a negotiated transaction, when it's really not. In our culture, high ticket consumer items, cars, boats, houses, things that cost the consumer lots of money are all negotiated transactions. And the reason is to give the advantage to the consumer. I mean, there's not a car dealer around that wouldn't just as soon sell every car at MSRP. Thanks a lot. It's a gallon of milk. It's $2.19. So we have a complete reversal about what's important for the consumer as it's its Achilles heel. And with the internet and the information available, the playing field is as level now as it can be. It's up to us then to educate the consumers in such a way that when they go into a dealership, they understand. For example, one of the things everybody complains about is dealer-assisted financing. That somehow the customer pays more money, like it was said in the quote, when that's not the case. The explanation is simple. I'll take a couple of minutes and tell you. In the process of loaning money, there are three universal processes. There's a financial obligation origination expense. You have to have a facility from which to loan money. You have to advertise to get people into that facility. You have to have qualified people there to negotiate terms acceptable for a car dealer to the customer, the dealer, and ever who's going to accept assignment of the contract. We have to generate the paperwork. We have to disclose the documents. We have to disseminate the documents. No matter who makes the loan, that process has to take place. The second is we have a loan servicing expense. That's the cost and money to collect the monthly payments and provide customer service. Somebody has to do that. And the third is we have a cost of money to lend expense. We got to get the money from either our passbook savers, the Federal Reserve, another bank. But no matter who makes the loan, all three of those expenses come into play. When a customer goes to a bank or credit union, those institutions incur all three of those expenses. They hustle up the business, they negotiate the contracts, they collect the payments, and they provide the money to lend. When somebody goes into a franchise dealer and we have dealer-assisted financing, it's the dealer that incurs the financial obligation origination expense. And when the paper is sold to whoever decides to buy it, the local credit union, captive lender, institutional lender, no matter what, those institutions assume the expense of collecting the monthly payments and providing the money to lend. So we didn't add any extra step to the process. We just segregated. The dealer put the obligation on the books. The dealer's a creditor at the time of consummation out of an installment sale agreement. The origination expense is the dealer's. Ford Motor Credit, whoever then collects the payments and provides the money to lend. Now, how does the dealer get compensated for putting the loan on the books for somebody who's going to run it out through its term? That's the difference between the wholesale rate and the retail rate generally on the APR or a flat fee. So it's a process if you can see it in its entirety. And we have information that we're distributing as hard as fast as we can. That there is no difference. It's just a reallocation of the three elements of making a loan. The more people that understand that, both from the consumer standpoint and the regulator standpoint, the better off we're going to be. Now, there's a caveat to this. And that is that the money we get for doing our share has to be equitable. So we have to make sure that what we get as our origination expense is a fair amount. But the first thing we need to do at all levels on everything that Randy talked about and that Bob put on the board is a matter of mass education at every level. And that is the first thing. The second thing, and we'll talk about more of this later, is we can't give them reasons to come after us for not doing what we're supposed to do. Bob?
Very good. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Randy. Ladies and gentlemen, I think, as you can see, we're off to a great start. Let's erase this now and get into our next topic, okay? Topic number 3. That'll go off, right?
Yeah, just go ahead and click on that one more time.
On this?
Right?
Okay, there we go. There we go. Technology. Again, thanks, Randy. Thanks, Dave. Topic number 3 is really the number 1 request we had for information on. And topic number 3 is digital retailing. Digital retailing and online sales. Digital retailing and online sales. Obviously, been a very hot button topic post-COVID. But in reality, if you look at surveys that were done pre-COVID, and some of them were mentioned just in the last 2 or 3 issues of Automotive News, and what they say is that pre-COVID, before COVID, that customers on average spent 18 hours plus online searching data for auto sales and finance and insurance information. And one survey I just read about 2 Automotive News issues ago was 98% of the customers spent over 18 hours. So to me, that kind of tells us that digital retailing has been going on for a long time. The new part about this, obviously, is because prior to COVID, we could come into the dealership, complete the paperwork as always. Now we're doing them online and off-site. And that gets into the things that we've been asked to discuss from Randy and Dave. Number 1, we'll be getting into e-contracting. E-contracting and the e-sign act. E-contracting and the e-sign act. Next to that is the consent disclosure that the customer signs, okaying to do contract and disclosures electronically. Number 3 is the protocol for disclosing a retail installment sales contract remotely. And Dave or Randy will comment on the ever popular wet signature discussion. Wet signature discussion. And last but not least, number 4 is the FTC cooling off rule, meaning certain retail sales made at home or at other locations. So again, the number 1 topic we were asked to provide information on, digital retailing, online sales, but tying it in to the F&I part of that, e-contracting, e-sign act. Randy, I know you did a great job in writing that as part of your update on the Truth in Lending Act, which you did for NADA in 2018. That's really a great piece. If people go to the appendix in the back, Appendix B, that's a great read. And then that also talks about the disclosure that the customer has to see and sign to continue this process electronically. the process for having retail installment sales contracts signed remotely, what has to be done. I know Dave presented that information in one of our webinars some months back with information directly from Hudson Cook as it relates to wet signatures. Then also maybe a brief update with respect to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission cooling off rule. With that, Mr. Henrik, Randy?
Sure. We can talk about all of these things because they all kind of interplay on digital retailing. Let's start with the e-Sign Act. The e-Sign Act is a federal law that basically says electronic contracts and electronic disclosures are just as good as written disclosures and signed contracts. However, you must give the consumer a disclosure and get their consent to do business electronically before you give them any required disclosures or before you put a contract in front of them. And that disclosure basically tells the customer that they have the right to have the record in paper form. They can withdraw their consent to the electronic signatures at any time, whether the consent applies only to this specific transaction or it applies to the parties' relationship generally going forward, and how following e-signature a customer can get a paper contract. The customer must accept those disclosures and send back to you some indication that they're capable of reading them. A consent to the disclosures is generally sufficient to do this, but the disclosure also has to indicate the minimum hardware and software requirements to read disclosures. Once you do that, electronic signatures and electronic disclosures are generally just as good as paper ones. Now, some states have titling laws that require wet ink signatures. Sometimes other documents under state law are required to be signed in wet ink, but if you can make disclosures, get an acknowledgement of those disclosures electronically, and clicking an I agree is a electronic signature, that should serve you just as well. Other issues that come up with respect to online sales are advertising requirements. Both the Truth in Lending Act, Regulation Z, and the Consumer Leasing Act, Regulation M, require you to disclose certain terms if you disclose other terms. In retail sales or credit sales, if you disclose the payment amount, the term, the monthly payment, the down payment, you have to disclose all the other of those terms plus the APR. Similarly, in consumer leasing, if you disclose the amount down, the monthly payment term, you have to disclose the others plus the lease payment and lease term. So, and whether a security deposit is required. These come up in advertising. There was a enforcement action by the Federal Trade Commission against a New York dealer last year that fined them for not disclosing the terms required by the Truth in Lending Act and the Consumer Leasing Act. That's an issue that comes up with digital retailing. Generally speaking, under most state laws, if you advertise a price for online customers, you have to honor that price even to customers who never saw it. That's a state law requirement, not a federal law requirement, although not doing so could be an unfair or deceptive trade practice under federal or state law. If you advertise something as a sale, is it really a sale? Or has that been the price all along? That's an unfair trade practice if you put phony sales up, or if you put up terms that are not the actual terms, such as there was one action by the FTC where a dealer said you can buy this car for only $195 a month. In the disclosure down at the bottom, which was unreadable because it was in white print, it said that that payment amount was only for the first 2 months, and then it would go up to $650 a month. That was not kosher to the FTC, and that dealer paid a price for that. There are privacy and data security issues that come up with digital retailing. As a general rule, if a customer is giving you non-public personal information, which can include everything from their name and address, their phone number, their driver's license number, certainly their social security number, you need to have that information encrypted from the point at which the customer gives it to the point of transmission to the point that you store it. It has to be encrypted at all times, or you will run afoul of the FTC safeguards rule. You also should get the customer to acknowledge receipt of your privacy notice, so you can share that information with whoever you wish to share it with, whether it's a service provider, whether it's an affiliate, or whether it's third parties. Some of those sharings require a right to opt out. And if you're in California and starting in 2023 in Virginia, you have a whole separate state privacy law that requires its own separate privacy notice. Let's talk about the FTC rule, because this one's a little tricky. What this basically says is that if you consummate a sale with a customer other than at your principal place of business, so it could be at an off-site location or at the customer's house, you generally have to give the customer a 3-day right to cancel the transaction and give them 2 notices of that, one of which they mail back to you. However, there are some exceptions, and this is how you structure a retail delivery. If you negotiate the entire transaction over the phone, by internet, or online, then that's an exception that doesn't require the 3-day right to cancel. Also, under an FTC opinion letter, if the prior negotiations take place at the seller's principal place of business or fully online, you can bring the final documents to the customer at their home, have them just sign the contract, and you deliver the vehicle to them there. What you can't do is negotiate the deal at an off-site location. So a test drive, if a customer takes a test drive and you bring the vehicle to the customer to test drive, you can't negotiate the deal with them. You can let them take the test drive, but you've got to set your procedures up so there's no negotiating the deal there. Similarly, if you take the documents out to the customer with the vehicle to deliver a deal where you've previously negotiated it online, you can't try to upsell the customer at that point of signature. Or in both of those situations, you'll run afoul and you'll have to give the 3-day right to cancel. This is a very tricky scenario. The best way to do it is to do it totally online or by phone, and then have the customer e-sign the contract and just bring out the customer's pre-signed copy with the vehicle at their home, and you should be okay without having to give the 3-day right to cancel. So I think that deals with those issues. Dave, do you want to talk about practical application?
Just fleetingly, because I want to get on to things we can do in the store. The wedding signature situation during the pandemic, a lot of latitude shown there. The kicker is for the consumer. This is the government's fear. Is that if I give you all your documents on a thumb drive, do you in fact have the understanding and the means to regenerate those documents? That is the primary fear of the government. That somebody says, yes, I'll take that thumb drive. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to take one. And then as a consumer, has lost his access to his own documents. Bob?
Very good. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Randy. Number four.
Click on it again.
Get the trash.
Okay, number 4. Let's talk a little bit about the ABA's, American Bar Association, 2020 auto sales and finance resolution. Vote was what, 336 to 16. And Dave and Randy, will you please talk about that as it relates to dealers that faithfully implement the NADA, Fair Credit Compliance Program?
Yes, this came from
Fair Credit Compliance Policy and Program, will have safe harbor protection against claims against discrimination. Randy?
Yes, this came from the ABA sections on civil rights and social justice, state and local government laws, and the Commission on Homelessness. They were looking at auto dealers and they were going to pass a resolution that encouraged state and local governments to pass laws outlawing dealer participation, requiring complete transparency on the cost to the dealer of a aftermarket product in relation to what they were selling it for. NADA did an excellent job of going to the ABA, explaining many of the things that Dave just explained to you, and getting them to change the resolution entirely to say that if a dealer, encouraging state and local governments to pass laws saying that if a dealer faithfully adapts and follows the NADA Fair Credit Compliance Program, then that would be a defense to rate participation and allow a dealer to receive rate participation in lieu of a flat fee as their compensation. This was a major victory for NADA because in the legal world, these ABA positions and opinions get a lot of authority and get a lot of credibility with judges and legislatures. So this was a great win. And what it does is it says the NADA Fair Credit Compliance Program, which is actually based on a 2007 FTC consent decree with a dealer for rate participation abuses, is a safe harbor to allowing rate participation if it's done in accordance with the NADA program, which we'll talk about shortly. Dave, do you want to add anything further to that?
Quickly, you know, the thing that amazes me, and the thing before the lobbying I did against the insurance commissioners was that dealers had to disclose the profit on a service contract. But where in a free enterprise system does any merchant, when he finishes the sale, have to turn around and tell the customer how much money he made on that transaction? Now, let's talk about the dealer participation rate modification form. What we're trying to do is bring a sense of logic to how we're marking up the contract for the reasons we marked it up and the APR we charge. So what we're saying here is this, that the government said we can tell the dealer you can charge your maximum markup over the buy rate, usually 150 to 200 basis points. And if you charge it to every customer, that's okay. Then what we do on that form is if we have to deviate downward for competitive reasons, the customer can go to his credit union, I can't hold 200 basis points. We want to move some iron. We have subvetted programs. There's 7 choices. And then we mark those choices as they occur, that we have a sense of balance within the system in that we have set an acceptable markup over the buy rate. We have a means for applying it to every transaction. But when it is a consumer benefit, we can deviate downward to help that consumer. AFIP has its own program, and ADA has one, Route 1 has one, Dealer Track, I think digitized ours. But the point is, this is becoming the industry standard. And it has inherent within it equity for the seller. I got to get reimbursed for putting that obligation on the books. But we have quantified and identified benefits to the consumer to go deviate downward. And that, I think, is a strong message to the consumers and the regulators alike.
Thanks, gentlemen. Great job. Number 5. Number 5. Number 5. Randy, your article written in Entrepreneur Magazine, Agents Liability. Agents liability for dealer actions. having calls with respect to that. Most of the time it's too late. But also, let's talk about that in terms of product providers. Product providers as well. Mr. Henrik, Randy?
Sure. A dealer who's out selling your product, or for which you are the agent or the product provider, is acting in a capacity that appears to be an agent for the product seller. If that dealer misrepresents that policy, misrepresents the terms of it, tells the customer that the vehicle service contract covers everything, and then it doesn't, the consumer is going to get a regulator involved. The consumer may get a lawyer involved. And the regulators and the lawyers are going to want to know what you all did to monitor that dealer, to train that dealer, to audit that dealer, and to reprimand that dealer if they deviated from the sale of your products and the way they should be sold. Excuse me. It's almost what's called in law an apparent agency. If it looks like this person is an agent, then they're considered to be an agent. And the dealer becomes a de facto agent for you and how your products are sold. So that if the dealer misrepresents it to a customer or misrepresents it in writing to a lot of customers, excuse me again, you're going to be the ones who could be held responsible for that. And it's going to be a very aggressive investigation into how you trained them, how you monitored them. Did you have them record any failed sessions? Did you follow up with them on audits where you found discrepancies or where customers complain? And everybody in the loop is going to be brought to bear on this, because that's what regulators and lawyers like to do. They like to sue everybody. And sometimes the dealers don't have a lot of money. And it's much more lucrative to sue an agent or a product provider, because the dealer has misrepresented your product and you knew about it. Why did you know about it? Because you closed your eyes and didn't take steps to stop it. And that's what those lawsuits look like. And that's what those regulatory investigations look like. So what's the solution? You've got to have good training scripts that you can produce, training sessions that you can show people were trained, auditing of deals, and reprimanding dealers for instances where you know that they violate or have reason to believe they violated the way you have authorized your products to be disclosed and sold. Dave, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, what the government is saying is we need a police force out there every day. We don't have the money for it. So now we'll make the agents and the administrators the police force. Before I started AFIP, I was one of the largest service contract administrators in the United States. And what I used to tell dealers, I don't want to be on 2020 for the way you're selling my product. Just put it in a cardboard box and the agent will be in there to pick it up. The problem, what we have in the real world, is everybody's complicit. That the agent's happy because the dealer's selling his product. He's getting money. How the dealer sells his product, well, that's door number two, Bob. We don't know. So what we're saying is that we have to have a policy in place, but the key is going to have to be that the agent is diligent enough and understands the process enough to make sure that it really happens. Now, what's going to save this? Automation. A dealer has to commit to data every element of that transaction. So the ability to monitor it, if we're of the mind to do it, is already in the computer. And so either the agent or the government agency can pull that data and very quickly see if the agent has done diligence on controlling his dealer. But the point is, we need somebody on the ground in those stores monitoring what those dealers are doing. And of course, now we have the Fox monitoring them because they're the ones that makes the money from the dealer. So in concept, it's a good idea. I think automation at some point will render it as part of the system where I can audit with the push of a button how much they made on every aftermarket product they sold. And what is a normal markup? We're going to talk more later on about how we in a store set up situations that are equitable to all parties. And the standard is going to be, is the price paid commensurate with the value received? It's going to be a debate as what that means, but that's going to be the acid test for everything we tell a consumer, that we sell a consumer and the method by which we sold it.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Randy. Number six. In April of last year, the topic that we did from a workshop standpoint was preloading products and services. Is it legal or illegal? This was the third highest request for information today. So preloading. Products or services. Is it legal? Or illegal? Randy?
Well, it depends on how it's done. Dealers can preload products or services on a vehicle, but they have to disclose it. They have to tell the customer that those products or services are optional and that they're negotiable, so that the customer is not given a situation where, well, we've loaded rust proofing, undercoating, low jack, and vehicle etch on this vehicle, and it's take it or leave it. Or worse yet, not telling the customer that's on the vehicle and building it into the purchase price of the vehicle. The price of the vehicle can only cover manufacturer installed options and freight charges. Anything else has to be itemized. If it's not itemized and the deal is financed, those items become part of the finance charge, and they have to be used as finance charge in calculating the APR, which will send it way over the state rate ceiling. In a cash deal, it's an unfair and deceptive practice to load products into the price of a vehicle and not disclose to the consumer, or to tell the consumer it's free, because it's not free. So as long as it's disclosed, as long as it's disclosed as optional or negotiable, that can be done. And many dealers do it. It's the same on new cars and used cars. If you're going to do it, disclose it, let the consumer know it's optional or negotiable, and then you'll be okay doing it. But otherwise not.
Thank you, Randy. Here's the problem. I went into a dealership. I didn't go in there to buy Gap or get my tires rotated. I went in there to buy a car. And when we find dealers that are trying to preload products, it turns into some kind of finesse where we're manipulating so many numbers that we get lost in a sea of numbers. Now, that's not to say that in some areas or some situations, I mean, if you're in New York and buy a Porsche and don't have tire and wheel protection, you've done a bad thing. Cars that are by the ocean, maybe you have a protectant for the paint. But the point is, this is all part of it. How can I massage these numbers in some way to suck more money out of this deal and still sell the car? The thing you got to understand, the only reason the guy's in the store or girl's in the store is to buy a car. So if you have some products that are unique to your market that most customers will buy, a soft sell up, maybe so. But it gets murky when it started loading all kinds of stuff on the car, and it's not really clear if it's optional or not, or the dealer's holding on to that deal that you got to take this stuff to buy the car. The purpose is to buy the car, make a good gross on the car. How much of the car gross goes to Gap? I mean, the customer's only going to pay so much for a car. He can only afford so much for the car. And sometimes in our zeal to manipulate and wring the last penny out, we kind of self-defeat.
Thanks, gentlemen. Number 7. Many of our agent partners, gentlemen, around the country, when they walk in and talk to dealers, they're talking about both NADA programs. And a common answer is, what in the heck are you talking about with respect to both NADA programs? Obviously, we know there's 2, and Dave and Randy did a great job already in talking about the NADA Fair Credit Compliance policy and program as it relates to just endorsing that and faithfully implementing that for the safe harbor protection under the ABA resolution. So I think we don't have to cover, unless you want to, that program. But I do want to spend some time on the NADA model dealership policy for voluntary protection products. And this was the second booklet, a program that our friend Paul Mitri wrote that he distributed in 2019. So Randy, you want to start us off with that, with primarily information relating to the model leadership policy for VPPs and setting a standard retail price for each and every product. Randy?
Sure. Both NADA programs are addressed to negate an inference of disparate impact. Disparate impact meaning you take a facially neutral practice, selling a gap or a service contract. But if you sell it at different prices to different people, it can be argued that you sold it for more to protected classes of people and people of color than you did to white males. So the way to get the best defense possible in such a scenario is to say, we're going to establish a fixed price policy for every aftermarket product. Now, the prices will vary based on the vehicle. A service contract for a Porsche is not going to be the same as a service contract for a Chevy, but every product will have its price for the vehicle. And that's the price we'll charge consumers. We won't ever charge anybody more than that price. If we charge somebody less, excuse me, we need a legitimate business reason to do so. A legitimate business reason might be a cap by the financing company on how much they'll finance for that product. It might be that the customer can't afford that product at our standard retail price. It might mean that we have a bundling offer in effect that bundles products A, B, and C, and thereby each of them gets to be incrementally lower. Or there might be a sub-vein program where the manufacturer buys down the price of a program. Excuse me. Those are all legitimate business reasons, but they have to be documented in accordance with that NADA program. There is a document in the back of that program, like there is in the Fair Credit one, where you indicate whether or not the customer was charged the full retail price. And if they were charged something less, never more, something less, then you must disclose a legitimate business reason that caused you to lower the price of that product or program. And that, which follows a 2007 FTC consent decree on disparate impact, is your best protection against a disparate impact claim. And by the way, disparate impact is not just ECOA. Disparate impact, in the views of Mr. Chopra and Ms. Slaughter, is an unfair trade practice. So any disparate impact can get you in trouble. But this is the best way to protect against it.
Thank you, Randy. Let me tell you what NADA has done. They've turned in selling aftermarket products into a legitimate business plan. What do we have to do if we're going to sell aftermarket products? Number one, the dealer has to establish a policy. What are the policies we're going to put forth in our store as it relates to customer benefits from the product? If you got a dealer that's selling something that hadn't had a claim on that particular product in 5 years, that's probably not a good product. So we have to have a dealer statement saying that value-added products have an advantage, but they don't impact the sale of the vehicle or the financing. We have to then make sure we have legal compliance and training and coordination. We have to have good product selection. We have to talk about product pricing. Now let's talk a little bit about what Randy just said. The service contract on a Hyundai and a service contract on a Porsche is different. So how do we then create a non-disparate pricing markup? If you charge a flat fee, I'm ruling the guy that's bought the economy car and giving a break to the guy that bought the Mercedes. So my recommendation, what AFIP does, is you mark it up by a percentage. We take the wholesale price and we mark it up a percentage. That way the markup is always commensurate with the wholesale price of the product. So it's fair for everybody. If I buy an expensive service contract, my markup's going to be a little higher. If I buy a less expensive car, my amount of markup's going to be lower, but it's relative to the price of the product. What else do we have to have? Product pricing is crucial, but so is product selection. The dealers need to take a good look is what commensurate with the value of the product relative to the price that customer benefits from this. I mean, some of this stuff, valve stems for life and all this stuff might put a little money on the bottom line, but when you get into it at a real test, it has no value. How do we advertise our products? How do we present our products? What's the method? What's the oversight to see that we do it properly? A big one is product cancellation. You mentioned earlier about the dealer being notified. But the point is, everybody on a cancellation has an obligation to return the unearned amount of money they collected to the customer if the product didn't go full term. We have to have a method for customer complaints. AFIP is in partnerships with NADA. We are aggressively marketing their program, and in our course material, they get one of the little signs that the dealer has to put on the F&I office talking about the value of value-added products, but that it's not incidental to the sale or the financing or any element of the deal. But I'm telling you now, the dealers have an opportunity to sit down and take a good look at what's really working for them before the government comes in and does it for them. So I'm giving fair warning. They're going to come after us like scalded dogs on aftermarket products. I'll give you, anybody who wants to contact me, I'll give you all the help you want. But this is not one where you want to wait to see how the ball game ends, because you do, you'll lose.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Randy. Number 8. Gentlemen, if you would, number 8 is something that never seems to go away. And that's what's happening in so many of our stores, the ever popular payment packing. Payment packing, product packing, tie-in sales, whatever. What you may not know is that in 1999, the NAG, I love that acronym, the National Association of Attorneys General, issued a resolution, both denouncing payment packing and defining it. So Randy, if you would like to talk just a few words about payment packing, Dave as well. I'm not going to write this up, but you can get it from us, whatever, or go directly to NAG, and we've done this in previous workshops. But the NAG defined payment packing as the deceptive practice of misrepresenting monthly payments to consumers during auto sales and lease negotiations in order to facilitate the sale of automobile-related products and services. That's been with us since 1999. Randy?
Payment packing takes several forms. What it takes in all forms is a failure to disclose that the products that are payment packed are optional products that the customer does not have to take and that are not required for financing. The two ways payment packing most commonly occurs is the customer agrees to a monthly payment amount that has some room in it over and above what the monthly payment would be for the amount being borrowed and the interest rate on it. That allows the dealer to put products in there and then tell the customer they're free. Or the product, the price of the vehicle being raised to include the payment pack products. If you don't tell the customer what the payment products are, remember, you could only disclose the price of the vehicle, the manufacturer added options, and the freight and destination charge. Everything else has to be itemized. It's optional. If it's mandatory, it's part of the finance charge for purposes of calculating the APR. And if it's misrepresented as being included because it fits within the customer's acceptable payment range, that's an unfair practice. It violates truth in lending. And as far back as 1999, Attorney Generals indicated that they would go after that, and they have, as has the FTC. It's probably 101 on what F&I officers should never do and what dealerships should never do. Dave?
The last two lawsuits I worked as an expert witness were packing payments. If you're mousing the numbers, I'll just tell you now, it's easy to find the mouse. And so if the dealer is packing payments to rate, term, first payment due date, whatever, and somebody challenges it, it's easy to find that practice is being done or not. So just sell them the car. Now, there are some techniques you can do to make sure you don't pack payment. For example, on a first pencil quote, you don't have the customer's credit tier. How do you quote his payments? You don't have his credit tier. You use your average APR for the last 60 or 90 days for new cars and for used cars. Tell the customer, sir, we don't have your credit history yet, but we've calculated your payments for the average for our store. So if you're challenged that you're packing rate into payment packing, you've tied it to something that's concrete. So Randy, what he told you was true. Do not pack payments. It's easy to find out, and there's lawyers, the plaintiff's bar. Probably that's the best Christmas present they could ever get.
Thanks, Dave. Number nine. Number nine. Number nine is issues relating to what's Randy, you and I talked about this before we began. What's a UDAP and what's a UDAP, UDAAP, and why are these two things favorites of both the attorneys general and also predatory litigators? Randy?
Thank you, Bob. UDAP stands for Unfair and Deceptive Acts and Practices. These are defined in Section 5 of the FTC Act for federal law purposes, but they're also defined under every state's law. Under the FTC standard and all state laws, it's very broad. It means essentially whatever the regulator wants it to mean. The FTC language is where a practice causes or is likely to cause substantial injuries to consumers. A practice is deceptive when a representation, omission, or practice misleads or is likely to mislead a consumer. Either of those can mean anything the regulator wants. And if you're accused of a UDAP, it's too late, because I don't know of any dealer who's ever won a lawsuit arguing that the bad thing they did was not a UDAP. It's the first thing a regulator looks at when they get a complaint from a customer, and they'll put everything they can into that. The 2012 Dodd-Frank Act, for purposes of the CFPB, added another type of practice, excuse me, called an abusive practice. That's a practice that materially interferes with the customer's ability to understand a term or condition of a consumer product or service, or takes unreasonable advantage of a consumer's lack of understanding, consumer's ability to protect themselves, or where the consumer reasonably relies on the dealer to act in the consumer's interests. So if your dealers are telling customers, don't worry, I'll get you the best credit terms, I'll get you the best price, and they're marking up that buy rate, that's an abusive practice. The FTC considers abusive to be a subset of unfair. So these are the three things, and UDAAP is unfair and deceptive or abusive acts and practices. Both apply to all auto dealers. They're very vague. They're the first thing that a regulator looks at when a customer files a complaint. And if you get enough complaints, there will be a UDAP or a UDAAP.
Thanks, Randy. I will say that in our course material, we hardly have a section of a regulation that doesn't have a corresponding UDAP reference. So it's prevalent throughout all of our material. Unfair, deceptive act or practice, you tell me. Almost every reg, the subtext is a UDAP claim.
Very good. Number 10. Number 10.
Just touch it with your hand. There you go.
Number 10, very quickly, we've been asked in the last 60, 90 days, whatever, COVID, credit scoring guides, point systems, whatever, what the heck's going on around the country with the FICO scores, primarily Model 8, but also others as well. Gentlemen, can we address that just for a few minutes, and then we'll close it out because of time. Randy?
Dave, I'll let you address it. There's no legal standard for FICO scores. It's purely discretionary with the credit bureau. They have the algorithms. They don't share them. They'll tell you what the factors are, but I'm not aware of any lawsuit where a credit bureau has ever had any liability for their credit scores. They're purely a practice of business. They're not the subject of laws. However, Mr. Chopra of the CFPB, who has jurisdiction over credit bureaus, says he's going to bring actions against credit bureaus for things they do. And that may include the arbitrariness of FICO scores. So stay tuned. Dave?
The trouble with the credit reporting agency is it's like if in the military, if I tell you what I did in the Army, I have to kill you. They're very proprietary. But FICO generates its credit scores on the credit scores of the other credit scoring agencies. So what we're getting into is a statistical battle as to what's relevant or not relevant. And I think in this one, the beauty is going to be in the eyes of the beholder, or the dark side is going to be in the eyes of the beholder. But in other words, the government wants to know what exactly is going on with these scores. So seeing numbers, and right now, they don't know. And I can tell you now, the credit reporting agencies aren't telling them voluntarily.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, this has come to a close because of time. I will tell you, and Mike, let me close it out from here. Again, our commitment is to help our agent partners and dealer clients to maximize deal profit, as always, as we say, but do it the right way in a manner consistent with good customer relations, sound business practices. Also, the recommendation, as we always talk about, is to develop a mission statement for your dealership. And the one that we recommend that's live from a number of stores around the country now, hundreds actually, is that the bottom line is that every customer knows what they're getting, they agree to buy it, they know why they need it, and they feel good about it when they leave our dealership. And if we would just do that as an industry, think of what that would do to our industry. And from a company standpoint, our company, the American Guardian Group of Companies, our value statement from the standpoint of what do we train, what do we teach? Very simply, we endorse and teach the industry standard and best practices that are recommended by NADA, both NADA programs, by AFIP, the AFIP Code of Ethics, the 9 canons, not falling into the traps of the AFIP 7 deadly sins of F&I and other things, and also our internal American Guardian Group of Companies. We call it our Seller Code of Conduct for Retail Sales, which serves as a guide to the proper sales practices for for all of our products and services. With that, just one final word about all of the webinars that you'll have. Today's webinar will be online. You can pull it up and review it, copy the few slides, whatever, and my scribble. I know you'd want to pick that up probably by the middle of next week. So 19 of them are online. That provides you with what we call our on-demand 24/7, 365 training for your agencies, for your dealer partners, your clients as well. And you're welcome to the information, the slides. Contact me with respect to that. We'll talk about how we can do the training together or with yourself doing that in your stores as well. With that, have a great wrap up to March, first quarter. We'll look forward to our April webinar on the second Wednesday of April. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Randy. Thanks, Dave.